Mike Maloney believes that the U.S. is falling apart. In fact, that's one of the reasons why he moved to Puerto Rico. He says that he keeps more of his money, as where he's from, the state of California, he believes that people give about 90% of their earned income to taxation. And in this interview, we talk about a whole lot of things, including precious metals, how they're going through the roof right now and why, as well as what's happening with the overall U.S. economy and the housing market. Hope you enjoy the show. Hey, Mike, it's always great to see you, my friend. I want to just do something a little bit different with you today. I want to kind of dive in a little bit about who Mike Maloney is. And I mean, you're an American, but you live in Puerto Rico, which is a U.S. territory. But I want to talk about why. I mean, the more people I've been interviewing and podcasting with, they're moving to Puerto Rico. Why did you move to Puerto Rico?
Well, there's that old saying that capital has to go where it's treated best. And being in Puerto Rico has literally saved me millions of dollars of taxes. And it would have been in California. They were punishing success and rewarding failure. They raised taxes. They used to be at 9.3 and they went to 12.3, and then they added a 1% mental health tax and another tax. And so there was one year where I paid 39.6 federal and 14.3 state. And then on top of it, the laws in California, they're making it very, very hard to run a business. And there was just too much regulation. My CPA filed a bunch of 1099s all at the same time, and so they thought we were cheating. And the franchise tax board asked for every transaction that my company had ever made. Now, that's a lot of transactions, and they wanted it printed out on paper. Now, after we had done the printing and shipping it to them, and then picking it up and having Iron Mountain shred everything was going to be $45,000 of my cost just to print the transactions and prove that we were right and they were wrong. We finally got them to accept it electronically. And they said, oh, you didn't do anything wrong. It's just that your accountant filed these all at once and had sent up a red flag. They thought we were paying employees as private contractors, and we weren't. It was one thing after another with the state of California. And I looked around, and Puerto Rico is the one thing that an American can do to legally mitigate their taxes. This is perfectly legal. You come down here, you get a tax grant. You've got to live here at least 183 days. You can qualify for, if you're exporting a good or a service from Puerto Rico to elsewhere on the planet, and you're bringing currency into Puerto Rico, then you can qualify for 4% income tax. And you can also qualify for 0 capital gain tax. Now, this was designed by politicians. They're trying to attract large investors that have a bunch of cash into the island. But if you look at this, again, from an economic standpoint, they're rewarding people that play with currency. You get 0 tax if you just do trading and stuff. You just play with currency. You get punished with 4% tax if you actually create something and export it. But it's still better than 52% tax in California. And then, I hope you don't mind if I go on a little bit here on the economics, because I think about this an awful lot. If you add up all of the taxes that every business has to pay tax somewhere on earth, and they pay tax, the employees pay tax. And so you take oil coming out of the ground, and that oil company, all of the workers have to pay tax. So their wages have to be higher because a bunch of it is going to be gone in taxes. There's matching taxes. Then there's tax on any profits that the company makes. And that oil might then be turned into a plastic. And that company that makes the plastic goes through the same thing. So the cost of that plastic goes up. And then that plastic might get used to make a capacitor that goes into an electronic device. And that company has taxes. I would imagine that everything would be about 1/10 the cost, maybe 1/100th the cost if we didn't have this. And then on top of it, when you finally produce a final product and you sell it to somebody, like I was paying 52% tax, and then you've got to pay sales tax. And in California, I think that's 9.5% or something like that. And then there's car registration, and California had the highest gasoline tax in the country. And so it just goes on and on and on. And your work hours, about 90% of your work hours are spent to cover taxes, basically, not 50% or 30% or something like that. So what I did was I legally mitigated my tax liability, and I'm down here in Puerto Rico, and I'm investing in Puerto Rico. There is a little bit of a backlash that has been happening here. Some musician came out with an anti-Act 2022 Act 60 song, and but anytime anybody accumulates any wealth, there is a group of people that will resent it and think that that person is hoarding all the wealth, not that they created it, that it magically appeared somehow and that person has all of it. And so, I've got this big farm, and we're trying to turn it into the largest employer in that municipality. And I've spent millions into that economy in that area, which is a very poor area. So it's me going up there and doing this is stimulating the economy there. It's good, very good for the economy. However, they resent it as, some rich guy coming in and buying up property and stuff like that. And it's not the case. This was an abandoned property that was destroyed during Hurricane Maria, but it had been abandoned since 2006. Anyway, so that's some of the story. I went off on economics. Sorry about that.
No, I think I get asked the question a lot, because they know, a lot of my audience knows that I went to Puerto Rico, and that you and we met up and we've podcasted several times together. And I think the question, that I have, are you ever afraid of being there? I mean, I know I just spoke with Harry Dent, and he had said that there was a very small group, I guess, of wealthy individuals that have gone there to lay their business roots down. But I know when I was there, I saw a lot of signs that said basically that, to go home, that they didn't want migration from the state side. Do you ever feel worried or concerned about your safety?
Usually not. There is a lot of there's a lot of killings here, but that almost always has to do with drugs. And so if you're not involved in any of that, you're pretty safe. If you're not in those areas, it usually happens late at night. But there have been some gun battles that are like open and out in the daylight, and it's rare, but I'm not that concerned. And I moved to my farm now. I'm no longer in San Juan, so I'm up on a very large farm, and I'm very secluded. And then I have other like-minded people there that work with me. And I'm not a gun person. I've never really liked guns, but I have a small arsenal now. And we're all off the grid completely. And so able to grow our own food. But what we're trying to do up there, it's very exciting, actually. Puerto Rico has something called the Jones Act. The Jones Act was established during World War I to strengthen our merchant marines. The merchant marines is basically all of the private boats that are out there that can be nationalized during wartime and used, in a war. And so they wanted to keep the merchant marines real strong. And what they did was they passed this law that any U.S. territory had to be serviced by an American-built ship that's American registered and American crewed. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. So they keep on changing it. Now it has to have 5% American parts. It used to have one American crew member. I don't think anybody registers their ships in the United States anymore. The liability is too high. They keep on modifying the Jones Act, but they don't get rid of it. It's an ancient discriminatory law that is making Puerto Rico poor. Puerto Rico should be the richest part of America. The reason is, if you look at it, the two most prosperous societies on the planet are Hong Kong and Singapore. Why? They're these tiny little areas with no landmass, no natural resources, but it's a free port where a container ship can pull in and redistribute all of those containers on a bunch of other boats that go all over the Pacific. Well, a bunch of them come right through the Panama Canal, and if you look at where Puerto Rico is located, the harbor, especially down at Ponce, the second largest city, is like the natural place for all of the redistribution for Africa, South America, Europe, and North America. It makes it so that Toyota can fill one ship with just cars and ship it here, and then it gets redistributed all over the place. And that creates enormous amounts of jobs. The Jones Act prevents that. And so it raises unemployment here. But it does make all of the food somewhere between 20 and 40% more expensive. And I bought a farm that's located up at the top of Puerto Rico, where the climate is different than the rest of Puerto Rico. Like I'm down in San Juan right now. The climate up where I live is 10 to 12 degrees cooler. You don't think of Puerto Rico where you have to wear a jacket and sometimes gloves, but that's my farm. The weather resembles Northern California more. So what I'm targeting is we're trying to grow crops and compete against California and Canada, not other Puerto Rican farmers. And we're trying to develop it isn't the world's first, but the most efficient. Right now, there's something I have to back up. There's something called permaculture. Permaculture is where you don't disturb the soil, and it grows topsoil instead of depleting it. If you grow topsoil, that is by definition sequestering atmospheric carbon dioxide. And right now, modern farming techniques, chemical monoculture, is responsible for somewhere between 9 and 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And this is the only thing that mankind does globally on a massive scale that can be turned from carbon positive to carbon negative and start sequestering massive amounts of carbon dioxide. And so what we're doing is right now I've got 100 solar panels, 9 Tesla power walls. I do have a pond that's 350 feet up my mountain where it overflows all rainy season long. So we can use that for a small hydroelectric. And we want to power this thing off of electricity. So we're trying to make a sustainable, regenerative, organic permaculture farm that sequesters massive amounts of carbon dioxide. I've got a couple of electric tractors on order, a couple of Tesla Cybertrucks, and I'm really heavily investing in that area. And we're going to try and establish a little institute there and get some really bright minds working on this problem. Because right now, permaculture it's more labor intensive and there's a lower crop yield per acre. And so it's a little bit more expensive than chemical monoculture, but the chemical inputs have gone up so much that it's not much difference. And so if we can bring it down to where it's less expensive, then the rest of the world adopts it simply because it's more profitable. And we have just changed the planet if we can do that. So we're on a big mission. This is a real gamble for me. It's not easy. There's a lot of obstacles to overcome. But I don't feel, the question was, do I feel like I'm in danger? And when I'm up there, no, we're very isolated, and the neighborhood is a pretty honest. They don't have the gangs and the drugs up there that they have. So you've got these projects that have very high crime certain areas, and I'm a long distance from those. So.
Well, it sounds like if you're successful in what you're doing, though, they're going to know where you are. So, it may not be quiet for long if you're the successful farmer, but you bring up some very interesting points. One, you talk about, the way that they farm nowadays. It's a high dependency on chemicals, and especially when you're with livestock and, antibiotics and all these different things. And now I know I couldn't believe it. Somebody told me months ago about them now using mRNA type of vaccines in swine and things like that. So you would think that out of all the ways that we can produce crops and produce livestock much quicker than what you're referring to, that prices would be down. But unfortunately, when we look at inflation, Jay Powell likes to say, excluding food and energy costs, that things are coming down, and everybody knows the exact opposite is true.
Right. You got to exclude the things that we would die for.
Right. I mean, right. Our necessities, right? Oh, by the way, if you want to eat, that's 40% inflation. But, and that brings me to another point here, that you're in Puerto Rico. You're probably not coming back, right? I mean, that's a fair assessment to say, right? You're not going to live on stateside again.
There's going to come a day. Right now, I'm down here like full time. I think I was, my mother passed away in December, and I did go back to visit her several times last year. So, but
I remember that.
Sometimes I'm out of Puerto Rico for less than a week, especially during COVID. I was just here.
Yeah.
But there will come you have to be here 183 days a year, 6 months plus 1 day.
Yeah.
And then you can file Puerto Rican taxes, and you qualify for the 0% on investment income with that. But any day that you're off of Puerto Rico, if you're under the Act 20, or it's encapsulated in Act 60 now, they call it, the 4% standard income tax, that whenever you're not in Puerto Rico, you're going to be paying federal income tax.
Yeah. Well, we have so much to unpack here, but one of the things I want to talk about is, it seems like we've never been, as far as the United States, we've never been so divided, so politically, morally, ethically.
Right.
Our moral compass seems to be shattered. It seems like the big question I have for you is the U.S. falling apart?
I think so, but I think there's I have to admit to everybody, I am a libertarian, and I'm proud of it. All of the founding fathers were libertarian, except basically Hamilton. The founding fathers were libertarians. So I'm socially extremely liberal, but fiscally, I am extremely conservative. So I don't believe that what anybody else does, unless it affects me, it's none of my business. But I also do not believe in theft. I think I was taught that stealing was wrong. And in order to be able to give a certain population something, unless government gets into business and starts producing something itself, it's got to steal it from somebody else to be able to give it to somebody. And so when we vote for all of these things, we should be more careful with our votes. But I sit back and, what's interesting is sometimes I'm talking about economics, and people will think that I'm talking about politics. And I don't mention a single politician's name. I just talk about economics. I talk about taxes. I talk about currency flows and so on. And right away, that somebody will interject, this politician or that, but this guy's doing this, and my guys. So they're all playing for the red or the blue teams, and I get to sort of sit there in both amazement, entertainment, and horror at this, because it is becoming so divisive. And yes, the country is falling apart, but I think there's going to be enough people to where hopefully there are enough people that can salvage something from this. But we are becoming so, and artificial intelligence and the internet, the mass media, and the tech giants put us in these echo chambers, and it's part of what is causing this huge divide among people, and it's really sad to see. And so I try to ignore as much of it as possible. And what I like to do is just get data sets and look at data instead of paying attention to any of the news, because the news that you get to see is tailored for your beliefs, your tastes, and it's just going to reinforce them and make other people even more wrong, and in your opinion. And so, I really do worry about it.
I love the fact that you're such a historian. I mean, for anybody, they should cruise over to your YouTube channel and check out your videos, because, I mean, they could spend years learning from you about what you call fraudulent paper. But take us back to 1776, because I know, well, first, Mike, I have a sheet in front of me that a friend of mine printed out and dropped off. He was an attorney, and he's just an entrepreneur now. But anyway, these are some of Thomas Jefferson's top 10 quotes on money and banking. And I want to talk for a minute, a little bit of history. But I was surprised that this is one of the quotes. The Bank of the United States is one of the most deadly hostiles existing against the principles and form of our Constitution. An institution like this, penetrating by its branches every part of the Union, acting by command. I could read the whole thing, but I won't. But I mean, this is Thomas Jefferson back in the day. But let's talk about back in 1776, because I want to get your opinion on globalization. And by the way, I'll drop this in the show notes below, but I want to get your opinion on globalization, because you said, socially speaking, you're very liberal in your thoughts, and then you had said, as far as your money and business, and you're very conservative, and the fact that you feel that the government has overstepped their bounds by taxing, 90%, you quoted 90 some percent of your life working goes in some form or another to taxes. But in 1776, the signing of the Declaration of Independence as the United States of America, and by the way, guys listening, that's only 248 years ago. Basically, Mike, in your words, what was meant for the American people back then? I mean, when they signed this Declaration of Independence, what do you think that meant, and how far off are we from that today?
Well, what was it? It was a tax revolt. The Boston Tea Party was a tax revolt that really started this whole thing. And they were declaring independence from a body that was imposing laws on them and overtaxing them, that was remote and really didn't have that much to do with them. And the first hyperinflation, the United States has actually been through a couple of hyperinflations. People don't realize this, but the first hyperinflation was the continental dollar. The continental dollar was our own currency that we were using in the colonies. There was the colonial currency, and then the continental currency, which helped to fund the Revolutionary War. They were supposed to print a certain amount of them, and that was supposed to pay for the whole war, and then they were going to retroactively back it by gold by future taxation of the population. And it's almost comical. I don't have the data in front of me, but I wrote, there is, I think it's in my first book, that they went back and they had to print more, and then they had to print more, and they had to print more. And the continental dollar, when it first came out, was on par with the Spanish mill dollar, the Spanish pieces of 8 that had the same silver content as the silver dollar has today. That was the most commonly circulated currency in the colonies at the time, the Spanish mill dollar. And so it was on par, and it fell to where it took 1,000 continentals to buy one silver dollar. So it had that enormous hyperinflation, and it gave rise to a term which is, it's interesting. Americans don't really know this term anymore, but it used to be very popular here. But if you travel to Australia, they use this term still. That's something, it's just not worth a continental. That's a term that used to be used in the United States quite a bit. So the founding fathers, yes, they were very libertarian. It was a tax revolt, and we keep on voting to, it's interesting. If you look at the latest data from the IRS, the bottom 50% pays a little bit less than 3% of the taxes, and the top 50% pays 97 point something percent of the taxes. And then you get to like the top 10%, and I think it's 70, they're paying 75% of the tax. And so if you want if you want the rich to pay their fair share, then we need to give them about a 90% tax cut. If there's a cost of admission into society, into life, then I don't know the answers to any of these things. I just know that there's this big tax the rich thing right now, and we already are taxing the rich. That's what we do. But what do the rich do with their wealth? They keep it invested in business. Most wealthy people got there by creating some sort of good or service that we all voted for with our wallets. We wanted that thing. And so they were providing a good or a service for us, and they become wealthy doing so. And then we demonize them like somehow that wealth already existed, and it's a static pie that they are all hoarding. And so we've got to tax the rich. Well, when you do that, you actually destroy jobs. If I was left with all of that, the currency that was taken away from me through taxes when I was in California, my business would have been 3 times the size, or I would have been paying, if you allow businesses to grow, if you leave them with their profits, they'll hire more businesses, they'll become more competitive, prices will come down, and they will also, once you reach close to full employment, then you have to start bidding for you. Wages are driven up once you reach near full employment, because companies have to compete against each other to get a good employee. And so it's just good for the economy all around to not, I had an S Corp. And so all of I probably should have done a C Corp and just left all the profits in, and then you're paying a lower tax. But if you take any of the profits out, you pay double taxation. You have to pay it again privately. With an S Corp, all of the profits flow through to you as an individual, and the IRS and the Franchise Tax Board in California are saying, well, you made this amount last year. No, I didn't. I only took home this amount. I'm trying to grow a business. Well, a business made this amount. Well, that's a bunch of employees that I didn't hire. I didn't spend that into the private economy, hiring companies to help me with internet marketing and so on, and paying people. And that's where it would have gone. Instead, it gets taken away and it gets run through the bureaucracy where, first you have to pay the people at the IRS that are taking it from you. You send your check in, they have to get paid, their attorneys have to get paid. It goes to Congress and they're going to argue about it, and all those people have to get paid, and their aides have to get paid. And then they come up with some new program and a spending bill, and they send that to the president. And there's all these people that have to advise the president that are going to get paid, and the president gets paid. They sign this new thing into existence, and they've got to have a head office in Washington, D.C., and then branch offices in every state, and then in every major city there's an office for these things. And so you take $2 out of the real economy in taxes, and you run it through this bureaucracy, and everybody gets a piece of the pie, and then $1 comes out and pays a teacher to do something valuable. So it's a very inefficient system. Business can do a better job of all these things. And I sort of like voting with my wallet. It gives us all what we want.
Yeah. Well, the regulation, you can't forget those. I mean, it's not just the taxes, it's the regulations that are being imposed. I mean, in my business, the regulation is what prevents us from having more affordable housing in a lot of ways because it's
Yes.
expensive to make a house. And, but yeah, I hear you. And a lot of that, and I want to talk about manufacturing a little bit because a lot of, we think about, and I want to kind of tie this to gold because we got away from the gold standard. But back in the 1970s and 80s, we shipped a lot of our jobs, and I think and sort of to put a different perspective on it. When I'm looking at, I think a lot of people are aggravated with big business, and I take business and I sort of put it into two different buckets. I'm a small business, and so are you. I mean, you may be one of us may make more revenue than the other, but the point is we're still classified as a small business. I look at business in two different ways. You have corporations or corporate business or publicly traded businesses, and I think of them more like bureaucrats, the bureaucracy, and I think they get them confused. I think rightfully so when they're looking at the bureaucrats, at least in my opinion, these large corporations. They're not considering people jobs like you do, Mike, setting up a farm in Puerto Rico where you actually want to employ somebody and see them do well. What happens, and I think where a lot of people are mad at big business and how a lot of people say that the only thing that defies gravity is currency, because as they print more, the bottom 50%, as you were saying, wants the stimulus, they want to print it, but yet they become more broke when it happens, and all the money just kind of goes up because of inflation. And so what happens is they feed these big bureaucracies or these big corporations, and then they don't really, in my opinion, they don't think about the employee as much. In fact, if they're more interested in their shareholders than they are, Mike or Tina or Mary or whatever that has to pay their mortgage payment, and they simply close businesses down, locations that don't meet their. I mean, it's a small business will go down with the ship. They'll put their check in the drawer, pay their employees, and they won't let people go until they're not making a penny, right? And they'll hold on to them. So the small business is really what I believe should be, we should triumph the small businesses. But these regulations, so what we're doing in a way, and I want to get back to the manufacturing because a lot of people, we go, okay, where did we go wrong? How did house prices go up, 312%, where wages went up less than 30% since the 1980s? Why did we take 4 million manufacturing jobs and ship them offshore? Well, I can look at that and say, well, a lot of that was greed. They were big corporations that said, hey, we can go to these these countries where labor is pennies for an hour's wage, and we can have them make these products. And then there's a way that we can obviously tax them, tariff them, and things like that to get the products back to the U.S. But a lot of people think of this globalization or this offshoring. They think of the 70s and the 80s. But really, I mean, this happened a long time ago. Back in the 1800s, that was the beginning of globalization, was that they were using the gold standard, right? And basically to come up with this uniform system. You had mentioned it. We had, the dollar, we had the Spanish, whatever it was, that, as far as all these different currency types. And then they said, hey, look, we have this gold. This is a universal. This is universal money. It's something that we can, securitize, and we can back the currency with. And that's when I believe the beginning of this globalization occurred. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, it did. And under the gold standard, the globalization worked. It was a great thing. John Maynard Keynes wrote about it one time. The gold standard balances all economies because you can't print it. It takes a lot of work to bring it into existence. And so when a country is experiencing a boom, they'll start importing stuff from other countries, less expensive goods. And so if you can imagine the globe here, and one country goes into a little bubble, other countries experience where the currency is it's experiencing a boom, but as it imports goods and so on from other countries, it's paying out gold, and it experiences a deflation, which lets that bubble deflate. It doesn't burst like they do today, where we have these huge crashes. And the country that's selling the goods and services then goes into a little bubble, and then it starts buying stuff from other countries, and so it's this constant little tiny bubble and deflations happening all over the planet, balancing everything constantly. And we had John Maynard Keynes wrote about how an Englishman could be reading the newspaper, pick up the phone, and order any of the goods of the earth from his phone, or invest anywhere. And you could travel back then without a passport. It was when World War I came along, the whole thing fell apart. And it was basically because countries stopped, all of the European countries stopped England was the hub of the gold standard. And the British pound was the envy of the world. And England was responsible for about 25% of the GDP, and it controlled about 25% of the world's landmass. When they got involved in the war, all the countries stopped paying out gold and lit up the printing presses. And that was the death knell eventually for the gold standard. They tried to do a pseudo gold standard between an intra-war gold standard that didn't really work. And England pulled out of that in, I believe it was 1932. But World War I, after World War I, it was England and the United States were the hub of the gold standard. And then when England pulled out, it was only the United States. And that it's the wars. Our gold stock went up, I believe it was 73% during World War I, and another 117% during World War II. Because during these wars, Europe took all of their young men off of the farm and turned them into soldiers. So they had to import all of their grains and stuff from us. And they stopped producing toasters and start producing machine guns. They stopped producing cars and start producing tanks. And so all of their consumer goods would come from us, and they were paying us with gold until we got involved in the wars. And then we just made them loans, and that the loans flooded the world with dollars. And it's a very interesting story. It's all in my first book, all of the steps of how the U.S. became the dominant financial power. It isn't because we're smarter or harder working or something like that. It's largely because of these wars, where the war was not on our soil. It's always better for other people to get, people used to say war is good for the economy. Europeans don't see it that way.
Yeah.
Only Americans see it that way.
I was going to ask you because, when I was growing up, I've heard, from my family and in school, that America survives and survives and thrives on war. And what you're just explaining, that's why. That's because of our loans.
Humans are funny things. I really don't understand. Everybody wants to pick a team. We were talking about that earlier. You're on the blue team or you're on the red team. And a whole lot of people are going to be voting for somebody because they hate the other guy so much. I just can't bring myself to do that. I have to, I'm not going to vote for somebody just because somebody else is evil. The lesser of two evils is still evil. But we've got all of these politicians jockeying for position in the world is very close to nuclear war right now. We just announced that we want to make, or some general or whatever announced that we want to make the Ukraine part of NATO. And, if I made a video back in, I think, 2014, and I showed this map of how NATO has Putin had done a press conference, and it didn't make any of the mainstream media here. But basically, you could predict this from that press conference that he gave back in, I think it was early 2014. And he basically laid all of this out. And then months after doing this presentation, it's one of my most popular videos. It's called Why Russia Feels Surrounded. But you could see this coming, not from a mile away, from 7,000, however far the Ukraine is from Puerto Rico. I could see this coming from 7, 8, 10,000 miles away, whatever it is. And then I discovered a video just a few months later where a Harvard professor of Russian history, the video was titled, Why Putin Has to Wreck the Ukraine, in 2012. So all of the signs are there. You could follow the roadmap. And this thing about NATO creeping closer and closer to Moscow, this is what they are afraid of. And it's very similar, but reversed to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it's bringing us close to nuclear war. And then you've got the stuff happening in the Middle East. I see people trying to do good things on this planet. Like, for instance, I've owned Teslas for, my first Tesla was a 2010 Roadster. My second was a 2011 Roadster. My third was a 2012 Model S. And I've met Elon Musk a few times. And there are people trying to do tremendous good on this planet. There's 8 billion people on the planet. There's one that can't sleep at night because he goes, oh my God, we could have an extinction event tomorrow. The only logical thing is to colonize Mars. There's nobody else doing it, so I guess I'll make it my responsibility, and I'll gamble half of my fortune on that. And then the other one, oh my gosh, the atmosphere is changing. We're using up all these petroleum resources for transportation. We should be saving those for plastics and medicines and things in the future. We need to accelerate the advent to sustainable energy. And there's nobody else really doing a good job of that. There's half-hearted attempts. So I guess I'm going to make it my responsibility, and I'll gamble the other half of my fortune on that. And I'll start a car company and an energy company and a rocket company all at the same time, and actually go deep into debt in the middle of it.
And it'll also show where he can get rid of 80% of Twitter and it still functions. Right.
Yes. Right. And people want to tear him down for some reason. And at the same time, we've got these politicians and people that are sort of trying to end humanity and life on Earth. I don't understand humans. I'm sorry. I always try to take a step back. In fact, there's a marvelous video by Carl Sagan. Whenever something happens that is really bad, I go back to the pale blue dot. Just do an internet search for the pale blue dot. Carl Sagan videos are great, and they give you a true perspective when you're looking at the Earth as a whole and humans as a whole, instead of all of these little divisive things. And it's the politicians. You've got to keep people afraid to stay in power. You've got to draw an imaginary line on the globe and make the people on the other side of it different than we are somehow, and then scare the population that you're controlling to gain power and to stay in power. And so I don't know.
Well, do you believe in globalization? I mean, let's talk about manufacturing and things like that. Now, you're in Puerto Rico. You're on a big farm. You're off the grid. You're not really worrying about, personally, maybe you're worrying about it, morally or ethically, about, the state side and how we were impacted in the whole world was impacted during the shutdown. But when we look at it, there are a lot of people that believe, hey, we need to take care of ourselves first. You talk about Ukraine, you're talking about war in the Middle East. We're talking about a lot of resources and money that's going out, and we're also looking at people that can't afford a home and they're homeless, or we have a mental illness problem in the U.S. and a lot of homeless population. I went to Washington State and Oregon and recently in business travels. It was really worse, Mike, than what I had thought or imagined, even seeing on TV. And while I was there not that long ago, a few months ago, they said, "Wow, this is so much better than it was," and which is hard to believe. I mean, people were literally roaming around the streets like zombies in the cities, and doing drugs, and it was a sad state of affairs. But when I look at what happened in COVID, when they shut us down, I look at the global dependency, and the crippling effects that it had on us in the U.S., around the world. But I'm talking about here in the United States. Do you still believe or think that globalization and not making anything here, really, importing the important things in life, our medicines, for instance, our ingredients for our medicines? I mean, look, we're picking sides and making enemies with these countries that provide us with our ingredients for our medicines that we need. A lot of people need to stay alive. Our food, growing, whether it's the fertilizer or phosphorus or whatever it is that we need here in the U.S. for mass scale food production. And when you look at microprocessors, I know we're trying to develop plants here now, but maybe it's a little too late in a lot of different ways. I mean, I look at it as, when I see where we are right now with the deficit spending, the consumer debt that we're seeing, the government debt, the fact that more and more control and the bigger divide between the have and have-nots. Where are we going with this thing? I mean, I asked you earlier, whether the U.S. was falling apart, and you said yes. But where do we go? What's the next decade look like? I mean, what's going to happen in the next 12 months?
I don't know. It seems like we're getting very close to some sort of tipping point. The book Anti-Fragile talks about complex systems that aren't stressed. As you add this complexity and you protect it from stress, it becomes more and more and more fragile. And we've got a system that is everything is so interconnected, but so incredibly complex that, Elon Musk was worried about a modern dark age, and it could literally happen. The globalization, I'm sort of an anti-government person because I see that governments prevent people from dealing with one another. Most people want to make a living, and to make a living, you've got to do something where you're benefiting another. You've got to either you're going to work but that business is creating a product or a service for people, and so making a living is actually pretty altruistic. It's the butcher, the brewer, and the baker from Adam Smith, that they're in pursuing their own interests, they're doing the greatest good for humanity, for society. And when the government gets involved and prevents it with barriers. And so when it comes to globalization, if we didn't have all of these different currencies and all these different laws and all these different governments, all of this stuff would balance out and we would all become much wealthier all across the planet. The disparity that we have does create poorer nations that have lower wages. And if you don't, if you want your iPhone to cost under $1,000, then, it probably can't be made here. I don't know. I do know that, I used to be a manufacturer. I used to manufacture very high-end stereo equipment, audio. And I won awards, and my stereo equipment is in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London as an example of modern design in the 20th century. And I loved manufacturing, but it's difficult. It's hard. And it was everybody in that industry. That was back in the 80s. And that was when everybody started outsourcing stuff. They do the design here, then get it built in China. And I didn't want to do that. I eventually got out of manufacturing.
Was that just because you couldn't be competitive? I mean, what I remember those days, everything was stamped made in the USA. I mean, they actually worked. The products lasted, not like when you go buy some junk at Walmart, and because they have a special line of manufacturing just for them. And it seems like, the minute you get it out of the box and you use it 2 or 3 times, it's broke. And we're just starting to accept that. But I mean, so when we look at it, we go, is that cheaper? I mean, when we look at it, we say, okay, when we lose quality control and a product doesn't last, is that really cheaper? I mean, shouldn't we just be paying for something that we only need to buy one time?
Well, it isn't necessarily cheaper, but it's more profitable. If you're buying it at a very low price and your competitors are still trying to make it where the labor market is more highly paid, then you're going to make the profit, even though your stuff will still sell. And then it'll break and you get to sell it to them again.
You just said it. And here's the thing. What you just said, you just answered it, why people are so angry at the rich guys. And look, and it's not because, I mean, you and I get it. We're not talking about small business here. Small business isn't setting up manufacturing plants in China. Small business isn't setting up call centers in India. These are big businesses that are doing these things, right? So what's happening is this is why people are angry. But for every ounce of energy and dollars that we are spending in doing that, we are robbing the American people of their right to make more money and to live in a higher quality of standard. You said it. Here's the thing, and this is frustrating, but here's the thing. You said people just want to do good. They want to work. They want to provide for themselves, for their families, for other people in the community. They want to feel like they're important. They want to feel like they have something left over at the end of the day. They want to know that they're not being tread on. They don't want to have to work 3 jobs and take medications just because they need to live, and so their pressure and their stress is causing them to be on blood pressure medication, statins because they're not eating right or they're not taking care of themselves. I mean, we are so far off the mark, man, so how do we bring that? I mean, can we ever go back to that? Or this is it? This is just a new civilization. You've got the World Economic Forum, right? We'll talk about that a little bit. And by the way, have you ever been on the World Economic Forum's website?
Yeah, very briefly.
Okay. I want to bring this to, if we could just pull this up real quick. What I want to do, so their mission is here. We'll publish it in the show notes. Their mission is, it says, in a world marked by complex challenges, the World Economic Forum engages political, business, academic, civil society, and other leaders of society to shape global, regional, and industry agendas. This was established in 1971 as a not-for-profit foundation. It is independent, impartial, and not tied to any special interest, upholding the highest standards of governance and moral and intellectual integrity. And here's what I found very interesting, Mike, because when I look at this and I go, okay, I don't know where we're headed, but I know that we're looking at, there's a lot of conflict going on in the world right now. You've got the World Economic Forum wanting to bring this one system. But what I want people to do is I want them to understand they can go to this website. They can click on their partners tab, and you'd be surprised of how many people are partners of this globalization. And again, I'm not trying to say this is good, this is bad. I mean, I don't even know how much choice people get in deciding anymore of, what they want for themselves or their future generations. I think a lot of this stuff is just being determined. I think a lot of this stuff is just way bigger. We've given up, we've gotten to the point where we are right now. And I guess, and the reason I say that, Mike, is because I love your insight, but there are a lot of people. I want to talk about currency, because in order to have a globalization like this WEF, we got to have a one world currency. Is that correct? I mean, do we not? If we're going to talk back in the 1800s, when they were first talking about globalization, it was based on the gold standard. Well, do you think gold standard's ever coming back? We've got the BRICS nations that are wanting to eliminate the dollar. Back in 2023, all the oil trade was done in dollars up until 2023, and I think last year only 40% of oil trade was done in dollars. We're not getting along with Russia, we're not getting along with China. How do we come up with this globalization or this global economy with the conflicts that are going on? Do you think we're really going back to gold standard, or is it going to be Bitcoin? I mean, what is it that where are we going to go with the next step if we're going to adopt this World Economic Forum?
Well, first of all, it's a shame that the globalization would have worked out if we hadn't had World War One and we just kept on going down the path that we were going down. If you have a one world currency, you take away each country's autonomy and ability to wage war against other countries, because you can no longer print your own currency and confiscate the wealth of your population. That's what happens during war. When a war breaks out, they print a bunch of currency to pay for it. I mean, the inflation that we're experiencing now is the currency that they printed during COVID and handed out, and it's all coming back to haunt us. So that the difference in wealth is transferred, and it was transferred. In this case, the government handed that out to the people,
and the people handed it out to the corporations.
Yeah, in a war, you're funding that war by diluting the currency supply and stealing wealth from anybody holding currency that has savings, and prices start going up and nobody knows why. Well, that's why. If we hadn't had World War One, I believe that globalization would have worked out really well. But you've got countries with certain laws and stuff that keep their populations in poverty. And if they're in poverty, that means their labor rates are lower, and capital goes where it's treated best. So I think that today, trying to go to a resolution to this, like a one world currency, I think that they are going to do CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, for each country, because that's how they trap us into that currency. And if you can only pay your taxes in that currency, and your business is only allowed to pay you in that currency, and so on and so forth, it gives them a lot of control over the size of the currency supply, and they can dilute it at faster and faster rates, print more, transfer more of the wealth. Basically, it's a whenever they print, it's a tax. It's creating inflation, and it's a tax that shows up, in your standard of living. Your standard of living falls unless you're on the right side of this wealth transfer. But I don't see this ending well for anybody. I think it's going to be very messy, and it's going to hurt a lot of people. And the World Economic Forum, I think this is extremely dangerous, what they're doing. These are people, we've already proven that central planning does not work. The USSR was the most scientific experiment in governing a people that's ever been. It was run by a bunch of scientists and economists, and all trying to measure the economy and quantify it. And they had one measurement of their prosperity by the amount of cardboard that was being made to package stuff, and the amount of train miles that were, if you're shipping goods and services. They had cardboard in trains just going around, circling the nation, so that the numbers would be up, and they were actually, it's basically creating a lie. And we know how that turned out. It doesn't turn out well. It shortens people's lifespans. There's if people go to my website, ggsr21.com, that's the book's website, Great Gold and Silver Rush of the 21st Century. So ggsr21.com. There's 2 free chapters there. And along with the chapter 4, chapters 3 and 4 are online. 3 is easy, fun. Read that; it'll benefit you for the rest of your life. Chapter 4 is the most difficult chapter in the book, and I needed it online so that I can modify it because it's sort of in process. But there's some videos that go along. There's 8 sections to this chapter 4, and the second to the final video that's on there, if you watch that, I take a detour from the book and I go to the report on economic freedom, the World Economic Freedom Index. And this is out of Canada, so it's more of a moderate group. So any people that are liberal that are watching us, you don't need to dismiss this information right away, because I could cite some other groups, but they're very conservative groups. And when I do that, though, 50% of the population just dismisses it right away. So I like to use the phrase.
Isn't that sad? I mean, exactly what you said. I mean, it's, they're just out of pure ignorance, to a lot of them out of pure ignorance, just because you're talking about one thing or the other. Just,
yeah, what this shows is the more economically free a country is, the more the lower their taxes to the GDP of the country, the size of the government, the soundness of their currency. Are they inflating their currency supply, or is it very stable? The property rights laws and regulation. When they overregulate small business, especially, they just crush an economy. But you take all of those things, they started out measuring just 16 countries, and now they measure 165 countries every year. And even though some of these are subjective things where you've got to look at laws and things and sort of give it a rating, when you're doing 165 countries every single year, you get pretty good at this. What's amazing is if you put this all in a spreadsheet and you hit sort, you find that the most economically free countries, the people live more than 15 years longer. I can't remember exactly. It's like 17.7. It's in that. You'll see it in that video. There's lower infant mortality. The poorest in the society live more prosperous lives. They make more income than in the most, where societies where they promise, elect me, like when Chavez was elected in Venezuela. Elect me, I'm going to nationalize those nasty oil companies that are taking all of your wealth. What he did, he was promising that he was going to lift the poor up to the into the middle class. What he did was reduce everybody to poor. And now the average Venezuelan, I think people live 19 years longer. The average Venezuelan has lost 17 pounds. I sometimes get these numbers reversed. In all of the governments where they promise to take care of everybody and we're going to share the wealth, what they do is everybody becomes poor with the exception of the people running the government. They're the ones that live in the castles and ride around in the limousines with bodyguards. So if you're part of the police force or the military or the government, you're going to be all right. If you're not, you're going to suffer. What amazes me is that, we've just seen a couple of generations of students in America sort of raised and infected with all of these socialistic ideas from very socialistic professors, and so they have very well-intentioned ideas, but all you have to do is look at history and you can see that the results are going to be disastrous. I mean, just history contains so much. There's such a wealth of information there. So the question was mostly about globalization. If we had globalization of fair law, if we didn't have government and people were left alone to deal with one another without one set of people being subjected to these stifling laws and living in poverty and another set of people becoming more wealthy, we would have a very balanced planet, and there wouldn't be these opportunities to go somewhere where the income is $1 a day.
That would mean that we'd need to produce more right here in the U.S. We would have to reduce our dependency on these other countries.
Yeah, you are right. But at the same time, I sort of see all of these borders and politicians as a silly thing that keeps us from prospering. We live in a modern dark age and we don't even know it.
Hmm.
I'm working on something where I can actually prove this. We don't know it because we don't have any basis for comparison. But when you leave people alone to deal with one another, that's the reason Hong Kong and Singapore are some of the most prosperous societies on the planet. If you go to Economic Freedom of the World Index, Economic Freedom of the World, download their report. It's free. Take a look at their methodology and how they and how they sort everything. Hong Kong and Singapore are up at the top. We used to be. It was Hong Kong and the U.S. And the U.S. dropped to number 12. Now we're back up to like number 6. But this is bad news for the U.S. It's not a good trend. It means that if freedom and the ability for us all to just deal with one another, if freedom wins out, then your lives and the lives of your children will probably be longer. If we go the other direction, it means that we're all going to be living shorter lives. And this is just data. That's what I like about data. I don't like watching mass media news because you're in this echo chamber that just makes you hate other people more. I don't want to hate other people more. So America needs strengthening, but at the same time, we don't have to do it at somebody else's expense.
Yeah. Well, give us some give us some hope. Give us some ideas. I mean, what should people be doing right now? I mean, you're obviously you believe strongly in precious metals. I mean, should people be buying? Should they be taking their currency?
I think right now is a time to start getting prepared, and you've got to do it. You got to do your own research and prepare in the way that you think is best, whether that's Bitcoin or gold and silver or emergency food. I mean, what you want to do is prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And that is exactly what I've done. So I've got bets in both directions, basically, where things go along great. I've got some things that are going to prosper. I've also got bets for everything falling apart. And I'm a big precious metals investor. I wrote the 2 best-selling books on investing in precious metals. And I worry about gold and silver going up because they go up in crises. And I've written, if you read my book, you would understand why gold and silver are going up right now. The book lays out the case. I mean, I spent $250,000 paying a research team and then printing, but for 4 years, me and a few other researchers were haunting the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the Congressional Budget Office, and so on and so forth, and really digging in deep on how all of this works. And the compilation of all of it is The Great Gold and Silver Rush of the 21st Century, my book. And, I'm surprised we're setting record highs in gold, and then silver has just recently shot up like a rocket. And I was showing everybody this in videos. I was showing the technical indicators that were saying it was going to break out soon. We had these giant cup and handle patterns, which is a technical pattern, followed by a triple top on gold and if you look at the fundamentals, it has to break it one day. It has to break it to the upside. And if it does that, it's very powerful. The triple top created an inverse head and shoulders, which was part of the handle of the giant cup and handle. And so all of these technical indicators lined up, and it broke that. And we've had what I called a slingshot move. And I have been making videos all last year saying that gold is getting ready to do this. There's going to be a slingshot move coming, so get ready. And then silver, I basically said the same thing, and it is doing that right now.
Yeah,
we're up in the 28s, and it was down at like 23 just a few weeks ago, and it's we're in a territory now where there's not a whole lot of resistance going up until you get up to the $48 region, 48 to 52, and there's going to be some resistance. But if you I sent you just a single slide earlier. Can I read you these a little bit from these 2 pages?
Let's pull it up. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that's 2 pages from my book. And so the numbers below show where the silver price would be relative to its 1980 peak. Now, in 1980, I'll just continue reading. With the price derived simply by multiplying the 1980 5250 high. Now, people always say $50. That was the close. The intraday high on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange was 5250. By the percentage rise in these other categories since then to their most recent price peaks in the last decade. And so, the Federal Reserve and everybody always uses inflation. Well, there's a lot of different types of inflation, and the CPI I call the CP lie because they've been fiddling with it since the Reagan administration. Every administration fiddles with it a little bit. It's the Bureau of Labor Statistics that puts it out. So the BLS, and I think the labor has nothing to do with it. So it's the BS that puts out the CP lie. Anyway, that it would require if you just go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website and you use their tool and you put in 5250 January 1980, you get an inflation adjusted price of $200 per ounce of silver. If you use a median price single family home in the United States, it's $468. If you use the Wilshire 5000 stock market index, the percentage rise since January of 1980, and you apply that to silver, you get $2,178 per ounce. If you use the 10-year Treasury bond, you get $1,059. US GDP, you get $468. The currency in circulation, how much has the currency supply expanded? You get $971 if you adjusted silver for the amount of dollars that are out in circulation, paper Federal Reserve notes. The M2 currency supply, which includes bank credit, which is most of the currency supply, is $781 per ounce silver. MZM, which they no longer publish, the Fed discontinued it in February of 2021. But back then, it was $1,250. And then if you average all of these, you come to $921 per ounce is the true inflation adjusted 1980 high of silver. And you can't name anything else in society that is selling at a discount today to its 1980 price.
Yeah. So you think it's going to go way up?
I think silver is absolutely destined for triple digits. Now, these numbers are ridiculous numbers. I don't expect it to go to these kind of numbers. I do expect it to surpass 100, 150, unless the dollar is going down at a rapid rate. Then the price of anything can ultimately be infinity. If the dollar goes away, the price starts to soar because the price inflation isn't the stuff changing, it's the dollar losing purchasing power. And so the true, if you average all of these things, you're coming out to $900 per ounce to equal that 1980 high. So I think $100 is in the cards, and we are currently, a quadrupling from where we are right now is absolutely logical. And in the book, if you read the chapter before this, Enormity Squared, which is wrapped around gold, but it takes where we are in the economy and it adds all of these things together, you can see that gold gold actually does back the dollar. People think the dollar isn't backed by anything. The paper Federal Reserve notes in circulation, if you go to the Federal Reserve's H4.1 release, you'll see that the currency in circulation, that the gold that was at the Treasury, almost all of it has been, the Federal Reserve printed up $100,000 gold notes and gave those to the Treasury, and the Treasury has almost all of the gold. There's a little bit at the West Point Mint, and government does mint gold coins out of the little tiny bit that is left. But more than
you say the dollar's backed by gold. Is that what you're saying? The dollar's backed by
dollars are backed at the price that the U.S. government calculates their gold at, they
What would a
keep
dollar be valued at?
$44.22 or $42.2222 is the statutory price for gold that the Treasury claims. That's what they're keeping it on their books at,
Hmm.
and that is what backs the part of the U.S. dollar. So the dollar is backed by gold to the tune of 0.4 cents per.
Yeah.
So 0.4 of a penny per dollar.
Per dollar.
Now,
Oh, that's great.
if you adjust it, if we did have a crisis and you wanted to make the dollar fully redeemable in gold again, you can at about, I think it's $9,000 gold today.
You'd have to shred a lot of dollars.
Well, no, you can make them fully redeemable and trade
You'd
them
have to shred them.
gold at $9,000 per ounce. Yeah, I guess they would shred them after they've given you your gold. What's interesting, though, is gold has been like one of the number one performing assets, gold and silver. I mean, it was $250 an ounce back in the year 2000. And today it's $23.50. And it's going up very rapidly right now. So it's doing this accounting that I wrote about in my first book. You create a whole bunch of fiat currency and gold lies in wait, and then suddenly does this big accounting. And it did that in 1933, or 1934, actually. It did it in the 1970s to January of 1980, and it's doing it again. And there are these brief moments in history where the safe haven asset that you run to protect your wealth also simultaneously becomes the asset class that has the biggest potential gains in absolute purchasing power. In other words, how much real estate are you going to be able to buy per ounce? How many barrels of oil, tons of iron, or shares of stock? And so if you look at things like the Dow Gold ratio, single family median price home divided by the price of gold over a century, you can see these waves and cycles. And right now we're in the one where, if you sell shares of stock right now or a home and then buy precious metals, you're probably going to be able to buy 10 to 20 times more homes or stock someday in the future. That sounds insane, but it's happened before. It's just take a look at what happened in the 1970s. Gold went up 24 or 25 times its price, and silver went up. It's in the book. People, but you can end up. I show an example. If you sold a single-family median price home, bought silver, by the time 1980 rolls around, you could have ended up with 17 of the exact home.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, when I asked you what people should be doing, you said buying Bitcoin, gold, or extra food in case you know what hits the fan. But you didn't say buy a house. So should people not buy houses right now?
Well, there's a whole bunch of different ways of looking at real estate. So it's really hard to value right now. If you look at Dr. Robert Shiller has his price index, the 20-city Shiller price index, which is, I was pointing this out back in my first video was shot in 2005. And I was at a conference called the Silver Summit, and I was warning people that there is an extreme housing bubble happening. I was showing them Dr. Robert Shiller's data, and nobody knew who Robert Shiller was back then. This was like brand new data. There was no Case Shiller S&P index. That didn't exist yet. And so this was cutting edge data that I was showing that nobody had seen. And I was saying real estate is in a massive bubble and it's going to crash. Well, I was about 2 to 3 years early. It is back. It's way over those levels today. So it's got a fundamental overvaluation. People can only afford a certain percentage throughout history, throughout time, a certain percentage of their income to put a roof over their head. And today it's at insane valuations. So that cannot last. Either people need to make a lot more and real estate just goes flat for a number of years and doesn't increase, or real estate has to crash or both happen, simultaneously. But I believe that we're in for some sort of economic event, and I think that this is going to happen. It could happen before the elections. Uh, I think that the Silicon Valley bank meltdown and that the banking disaster that we had in March and April of last year was just the warning shot. That was the speed bump on the way to the main event.
We just glazed right over. We just glazed over it. I mean, it was like that was normal course of business. Third largest bank collapse in history. Normal course of business.
But if you look at the way the 2008 global financial crisis played out, something happened first, and then there was 6 months, and then something else happened, and there was 5 months, and then something else happened, and there was another 6 months, and then it started coming week after week after week, and then day after day, and Lehman and Washington Mutual and so on was quite a ways into it. And so I think that we're experiencing something like that, where they have just papered over it for a little while, but they've raised rates. I mean, you saw the speed at which it isn't the amount that they raised the rates, but the year-over-year change in interest rate caught everybody off guard, and that's the reason for the bank failures that we've had so far. And they're not done. Commercial real estate, you know more about this portion than I do, a lot more. And you've been warning about all of this, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I just had a conversation at a settlement today with a title company, and we were talking about the commercial market, real estate market, and how really dangerous it is right now for people that own these buildings. They don't have the income to back it up anymore. A lot of them, especially office buildings, and they're up for renewal. Commercial loans, 5 years on average, for a balloon in the commercial loan arena. It's not like you get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage in commercial. You get a 5-year note or a 10-year note if you're lucky. Most banks won't even touch 10-year right now, or haven't, because rates were so low and they didn't want to lock in for 10 years. Right. They were expecting that rates would increase. But the problem is now, how do you take someone that bought a building 5 years ago and have a 3.75% interest rate? That's what their comfort. That's why they bought it at the price that they did, based on being able to pay that mortgage with their rental income. And now, because of the pandemic, a lot of the offices are vacant. They're boarded. A lot of the buildings are boarded up. Now you're looking at they're up for refinance, and a lot of banks aren't even foreclosing right now. They're just kicking the can down the road because they don't want the real estate, and they're just keep making payments, and they're giving these building owners extensions. But I'm seeing that all around, Mike. I mean, the residential, even the residential housing market, there are all types of legislation being proposed right now to prevent foreclosures. We've never seen anything like this before, where we have prevented foreclosures for now going on 4 years. We've prevented foreclosures from happening at mass scale. And so a lot of people are like, well, okay, will we ever see the housing crash if their legislation is just forcing these banks to continue to do workouts with people? So now, people aren't making mortgage payments. They're living in the house. So I think already, we take a lot of criticism because I said what you said. The numbers don't make sense. People can't afford 55% of their income. All of this BS about qualifying for a mortgage doesn't keep in mind maintaining the home, job loss, other debt and cost of living that have gone up. Now people that could afford, give you an example. I just had somebody call me up and said, look, my property taxes went up $8,000 from the time I bought my house to now, right? And they're going, we don't have it. We just had we just received our new loan statement, what they're going to collect, what we have to pay every month is a lot more than when I signed a year ago to buy the house, a little over a year ago. We don't have the money. We're talking about $8,000 a year, Mike. That's a huge jump for a $400,000 buyer, right? They don't have it. So what does that do to their debt to income ratio and their ability to stay in the house? So I think, we're seeing delinquencies rise on the in the housing market. We're not seeing the foreclosure. None of it is happening. I just looked at the charts today. If we want to look at what's happening to median home prices, we know they've come down about 17% from peak to now. In 2022, this is new home construction, we've seen a 17% average home price decline, okay, from 2022, the summer of 2022 to right now. So if you just take that alone, that's a massive housing crash, right? But we can't see data for existing homes because it stopped in October of 2023. So when we're looking and when we're not giving a true picture of what is happening, but you hear mainstream media talk about how house prices are continually rising, going up 5% year over year. We're not looking at the data. Why aren't we looking at data charts that reflect the information of the bullshit that they're giving us in mainstream media? That's the question. If we're hearing one thing, how does this taint the scale? All right, well, think about this for a minute. If you turn on mainstream media and you hear, Mike, that home prices have gone up year over year 5%, and now all of a sudden you're looking at a limited inventory, when you go out to buy, if you don't have any data to back it up, if you can't actually prove what you're saying, and you're coming out of these, you're pulling these, and we're looking at lagging data, backward-looking data, of course, you're going to give more than the list price when you're putting in your offer because that's what you're hearing, right? Why would you go against the grain? So all the cheerleaders, the realtors, the lenders, the mainstream media, look, guys, home prices aren't crashing. Oh, we were right. You have Dave Ramsey, brand new article in Yahoo Finance was just published saying, I was right. 40 years of housing experience. I was right. We're not going to see a housing crash. I'm with you. I think that we got some big awakenings coming.
They're doing just makes the eventual crash worse by stopping foreclosures and preventing the foreclosures. You're also limiting supply. If there were foreclosures, that's new homes on the market that would then bring the price down, hopefully gently. But what they're doing by stopping foreclosures, they're building all of this energy up, and it's like a dam that's about to burst, but you keep on building the dam higher. And
you're giving people free rent.
Yeah, and that is just when the excrement impacts the air acceleration device. It's going to be bad, and so that's I'm just preparing for there's always crashes and recessions and pullbacks and so on, and everything that they've done to warp the economy, especially since the pandemic, it just builds up energy, and when the free market eventually overwhelms all of the manipulations. If they just didn't manipulate, it wouldn't build this. But everybody wants stimulus, and they want things to be faster and go better. And so the stimulus, though, it all just twists and warps the economy. If we're up at 7 or 8 years of what's the figure of income that it takes to buy a house? It's like 7 years right now, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, even more. I mean, depending on where you are, if you go median home price to median income in a place like Massachusetts, it could be 8 or 9 times earnings. It doesn't make sense. I mean, and we're talking about household earnings.
Yeah. And that's historically about 3, I believe. And so
I would love to see anything under probably 5. I mean, if 4.5, you could probably make it work but you have to be real stewards of your money. You have to make sound investments in other areas. You have to make sure that the house that you're buying isn't collapsing around you. You can't waive your inspections and go in to this exuberance with, on a shoestring budget. Now, let's put it this way. If you bought a home at 4 times income, 4.5 times income, but you had saved money for years and you have $25,000 or $30,000 left in the bank for an emergency or some type of financial downturn, you're probably okay, right? I mean, you're going to think that you would hope that by the time you're continuing to work, the inflation, the wage growth would happen, and that you're locking in on a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And then you're hoping that if you're successful at your job or good at what you do, you're going to make more money year over year. The problem is, Mike, we're seeing people buy with VA, for instance, 0 money down, FHA conventional 3.5% down, right? They're coming to the table. They have no money. They have barely enough to get in. Sometimes now they're asking, we're seeing where sellers are giving back up to 6% to down payment, and that this is helping people. It's not helping people. What it's doing is it's teaching them that you don't need to have money to buy a house, and that's not true. You need money to buy a house. You need capabilities to buy a house, financial wherewithal to buy a house, to stay in the house. And we're not doing a job on that, in my opinion. We're not doing a good enough job for it. We're lowering standards, credit scores, and everything else to get people in the house. And we're just not setting people up for success. But
well, that sounds like a repeat of 2008 to me. It's a repeat of 2005, 6, and 7. Lowering standards, getting people into homes with no down payments. Back then it was you actually didn't have to fog a mirror to get a loan. So
that's exactly right, man. Well, Mike, I love talking to you, man. We could go on and on and on, but I want everybody to certainly check out your website, published below, all your links, your books. I've read your books. Your books are fantastic. You're brilliant, Mike, and I commend you on your courage and ability to step out from the norm and go to Puerto Rico and actually set up shop and try and make the island a better place. I think you're going to do it, man. I think you have a lot to offer, and I'm excited to watch your growth, watch your farm become this, amazing employment opportunity for people in Puerto Rico. So
thank you.
We'll be talking soon.
Okay, and I just want to remind everybody, go to ggsr21.com, and there's 2 free chapters there. And you can sort of see a little bit of what is going on in the world, especially from chapter 4, which is how the monetary system works.
Thanks so much, my friend.
Okay, thank you, Todd.
All right, guys, thanks so much for watching the video. If you liked it, you can let Mike and I know that you did by hitting that thumbs up, and drop your comments below. I love to read them, and tell us what you think about the U.S., the economy, and what's happening in your local market. If you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please consider doing so now. Hit that alert bell. You'll know every time we upload content just like this. And please don't keep this all to yourself. Share it with your family and friends. See you next time. Sachs Realty, Maryland broker number 607720, office number 443.